hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and click the description below to make sure you are on our mailing list, because believe it or not, some of our videos are so controversial that they are shut down by YouTube. Whether it's a YouTube about the 2020 election, whether it's a video talking about the failure of the media to hold accountable all these Democrats who have been election deniers, or whether it's skepticism about the lockdowns and whether or not natural immunity is better than a vaccine. These are the kinds of things that apparently the algorithm people over at YouTube don't like. So make sure you hit like, make sure you hit subscribe, and be sure to click on the link below in the description to make sure you're on our mailing list. Okay? Okay. I've done a documentary called Uncle Tom 2, a sequel to my first documentary called Uncle Tom, in which we talk about the black experience after slavery. After slavery, most blacks were illiterate. Within a few decades, most blacks could read and write. And in 1940, 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. 20 years later, 1960, that number had fallen to 47%, a 40-point drop in 20 years. That is the greatest 20-year economic expansion of blacks in the history of this country. Think about it. 87% below the poverty line in 1940, 20 years later, 40%, 47%, 40-point drop. Why? There was the Klan, there were lynchings, there were cross burnings, there was Jim Crow. Basically 4 reasons. Reason number 1, the family. It was rare for a black kid to be born without a father married to the mother. Extremely unusual. In fact, there's lots of evidence to suggest in certain cities, certain areas, a black kid was slightly more likely to be married to a mom, to enter the world with a mom and dad married to each other than a white kid. 20 years later, 1960, again, that number had fallen to 47 points. Now, this is before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, before the Voting Rights Act of 1965, before the Open Housing Act of 1968, pretty much. That was just 8 years later. Brown v. Boer didn't happen until 1954. And Jim Crow was still going on. Family. Also, a belief in the ideals of America. Now, that may sound heretical these days. A bunch of people running around talking about how racist America is, that America broke the contract, yada blah, etc. We'll get to that in a second. If you read the writings of people like Frederick Douglass, they are replete with references to the Constitution, to the American ideals, to American virtues, American values, even though, of course, those values were not being adhered to. And this is a man, Frederick Douglass, who was born a slave. He escaped from his plantation, escaped to Massachusetts, and was shocked at meeting blacks who were more prosperous than some of the most prosperous whites in the South. In fact, he wrote that he assumed that a culture, a country could not become wealthy without slaves. He was shocked. Belief in God, belief in Judeo-Christian values, a belief that God does not want to give you a burden that you cannot handle. So family, American values, God, and entrepreneurship. Booker T. Washington, also a slave, wrote a book called Up From Slavery, came out in 1901. Now think about this. He said in that book, and I'm paraphrasing, when a Negro boy learns to cook, to sew, to wash dishes, to practice medicine as well as or better than somebody else, he or she will be rewarded without regard to race. The world wants the best. That is a great, he said, human law. 1901, that's just 36 years after slavery. And he sounds more optimistic about America than these Black Lives Matter people, which I'll get to in just a second. Now, there was a rapper, I hadn't heard of him until yesterday. He was murdered at a restaurant, popular restaurant chain called Roscoe's Waffle and Chicken House. I think there are 3 of them in LA. One is in Hollywood, one is in an area called Pico, and one is in Manchester, an area not too far from where I grew up. He was murdered in the Manchester one. Here's a news clip.
Shock and anger from fans of rapper PNB Rock, who was shot and killed yesterday. It happened during a robbery, and the killer is still on the loose. CBS 2's Tina Patel, she's live with an update on this investigation. You know, Tina, do we have any idea of who this suspect may be?
Notice he said the killer is still on the loose. There were lots of people there witnessing it, and nobody said that the perp was a white supremacist.
Unfortunately, we don't, Chris, and that's what makes it so hard for everyone involved. You know, the restaurant is actually back open this morning. We just talked to a company spokesperson who says that they wanted to make sure that they didn't let fear get the best of them, but they say they are all here with a heavy heart, especially when they look out in the parking lot and see the growing memorial here. Marcus Rogers was taking his sons to school when they decided to stop at the memorial for rapper PNB Rock.
It's just sad because he was up and coming. You know, he was on his way.
He was up and coming. He was on his way. PNB Rock was a rapper. He was from Philadelphia. Came out to L.A. And a man, apparently demanding property, he had jewelry on, PNB Rock did, shot him and took his jewelry. Now, he was born Rakeem Hasheen Allen, 30 years old, rose to fame with a song called Fleek, F-L-E-E-K. In 2016, had a hit song called Selfish, and collaborated with another rapper for a single called Every Day We Lit. Here's a little bit of Every Day We Lit, or at least a video of it. And the term lit means every day we get high off of booze or off of some sort of drug. Every day we lit. Now, this is the second major rapper killed in South Central Los Angeles in recent times. The other one was named Nipsey Hussle, very respected, also murdered. Now, I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and my music was Motown music. Supremes, Temptations, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. I like Atlantic Stax music too, Otis Redding, Aretha Franklin. People didn't do drive-bys on each other. They didn't do hits on each other. They didn't bless each other out in music. What's happened to the quote unquote black culture? And I'm looking at PNB Rock's background. According to Wikipedia, born in the Germantown neighborhood of Philadelphia, his father was murdered when he was 3 years old, raised by his mom. Not uncommon now today for a black kid to be raised by the mom. 70% of black kids today enter the world without a father married to the mother, and something like 85% of these kids at some point will be living in a household without a father. And again, don't get mad at elder. Barack Obama. A kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in jail. A direct relationship between not having a father in the home and all of these social ills that you see. One of my friends is the great Thomas Sowell, the economist. He's written something like 40 books and came from the South, but he was raised by family members. His parents died when he was very young. Family members in East Harlem. And he tells me on hot summer days in the 1940s when he grew up, people would sleep outside. No air conditioning. It wasn't uncommon for people to sleep on park benches in parks. It was so hot. They would sleep on top of their cars. It was so hot. Nobody feared being robbed. Nobody feared being mugged. Nobody feared their neighbors. Nobody feared kids, teenagers. Today, that would be unthinkable for somebody to lay out in the middle of the street, on a park bench, on a lawn, wearing a watch, having a wallet. Nobody would think about doing that now. What's happened to our culture? And as I talk about in Uncle Tom 2, this is a combination of a number of things. One, the welfare state. A welfare state that has substituted government for family and for God. A welfare state that has incentivized women to marry the government and men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. Walter Williams is an economist, close friend of Tom Sowell, and he once wrote an article in which he issued a proclamation, a pardon to white people, to pardon them for their guilt about slavery, so that they, quote, stop acting like damn fools, close quote. And by that he meant all of these social programs that are designed to help people have the opposite effect. LA Times, back in 1986, conducted a poll. They asked poor people who are on welfare, is welfare a stepping stone in order to get you to the point where you are self-sufficient, or is it a crutch that creates dependency? 31% of them said it was a stepping stone to get you to self-sufficiency. 41% said it was a crutch. Now, what does that tell you when people on welfare, a greater plurality, are telling you that this is a crutch? The better you do, the more they take away your welfare. So it creates a disincentive for you to do well. There was also a poll where people who were on welfare and people who were not on welfare were asked the following question. Do people on welfare have additional children to get additional money? This is before the Welfare Reform Act of 1996. The majority of non-poor people said no. They probably thought it was insulting, probably thought it was condescending. However, the majority of people who were poor said yes. Women frequently have additional children to get additional money. Now, the other thing that's happened are all these guilty white people, as Walter Williams was talking about, that are doing things like race-based preferences. And it turns out when you lower standards, grades, and SAT scores in order to achieve a racial diversity on your campus, those people who supposedly benefited from the lower standards end up dropping out at a far greater percentage than those who got in under normal criteria. And it isn't that they drop out and go to a lesser competitive school where they would have been fine. They drop out altogether. They're angry at the world. They feel that, why did they put me here if I was not able to do the work? And as a result, you're doing a great deal of damage to the black GDP, a great deal of damage to the black culture. Now, fast forward, we have groups like Black Lives Matter. Now, think about this. This is a group that was founded by self-described trained Marxist. Karl Marx was an atheist, hated God, hated religion. In fact, he said he wanted to dethrone God. And you have an organization that 85% of blacks support, whose founders wanted to dethrone God when belief in God, belief in Judeo-Christian values is one of the reasons blacks were able to survive slavery and grow even before all the civil rights legislation of the mid-60s. Are you kidding me? And Karl Marx also opposed private property, which meant he opposed entrepreneurship and, of course, opposed capitalism by definition. And on Black Lives Matter's website, they attack the nuclear family as some sort of construct of Western civilization that doesn't apply to the black community. Are you smoking some? Are you mad? So family, rejected. American values, rejected. Belief in God, rejected. Entrepreneurship, rejected. These were the pillars that enabled blacks to grow despite the obstacles that they face coming out of slavery. Belief in education. Many of them being taught in one-room schools. And now, according to the National Report Card, 85% of black 8th graders cannot read at levels of proficiency, which means black 8th graders, 13-year-olds, are less likely to be literate now than several decades after slavery. What are we talking about here? And now you have a culture where a whole bunch of kids like PNB Rock, raised without a father, I bet you anything the person that killed him also was raised without a father, and now we are at each other's throats as if the other guy is the enemy. When the culture has been coarsened, in some cases by design. In Uncle Tom 2, we quote a KGB defector. And he talks about how ever since the civil rights movement, communists have tried to infiltrate it, to talk about their attack on capitalism, to convince blacks that the movement ought not demand equal rights, but demand equal outcome. And you can't have equal outcome when you have capitalism because there are winners and losers, say these Marxists. And so this whole ideology has infused the civil rights movement, the culmination of which are people like Patrisse Cullors, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. This is madness. And the KGB guy says, in our wildest dreams, we never felt we would be this successful in having Americans pitting against other Americans. And not just black Americans, white Americans pitting against other white Americans. 85% of Democrats believe Donald Trump is a racist. That means half the country believes the other half has voted for a racist, knowingly voted for a racist. And what the KGB defector said is that the Russians realize that the nerve center in America is race relations because of slavery, because of Jim Crow, because of the anger of a lot of people, and because some people are so guilty about it, and they're angry at the other people who are not guilty about it. This is the tension. This is the antagonism that communists, socialists, collectivists, and those who wish to redistribute income are gnawing and chewing at, to the point now we're at each other's throats. And the KGB defector says, we never could have dreamed that we'd be so successful in infusing things like Hollywood and the media and academia to the point where half the country believes the other half is racist. 61% of Democrats, according to a poll, believe that Republicans are racist / bigoted / sexist. 31% of Republicans feel that way about Democrats. That 31% is even high. But think about it. 61% of Democrats believe all Republicans, not just Donald Trump, but also Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley. And you have people like Erica D. Smith, a columnist with the LA Times, referring to Larry Elder as, and I'm quoting her, the black face of white supremacy. Now, I've joked about it, but when you look beneath the surface of that, it's not funny. Here you have collectivists, those who believe in the welfare state, those who are anti-capitalist, successfully causing somebody like Erica D. Smith to be infused with so much hatred that I'm the bad guy. Not the welfare state, not secularism, not people that are trying to pit us against each other. In the 2016 election, the Russians bought thousands of Facebook ads. Half of them were pro-black, supporting organizations like Black Lives Matter, and half of them were anti-black, attacking organizations like Black Lives Matter. They didn't care. They just wanted to rub salt into the race relations wound of America. And they have been enormously successful. Look at what happened after George Floyd died. However you feel about Derek Chauvin's behavior, and I believe the verdict was just, there is no evidence that he was motivated by George Floyd's race. Never mind, of course, that George Floyd resisted arrest. It wouldn't have happened had he complied. We don't even talk about that. The lead prosecutor in this case, a black man, said that the police in general were not on trial. The Minneapolis Police Department is not on trial. This individual is on trial, and he never argued in his opening statement or anywhere else that Derek Chauvin was motivated by George Floyd's race. In fact, there were 4 officers that day. 2 of them were white, including Derek Chauvin. One of them was Hmong, Hmong, and the other one had a father who was from Africa, I believe Nigeria. No evidence whatsoever that Derek Chauvin was motivated by George Floyd's race. What do we have? 4 months of protests, violent protests in the streets of America. 25 people on the minimum died. 2,000 police officers wounded. At least $2 billion of damage. I say at least because that's insured damage. We don't even know about the damage that was uninsured. It might have been $3 billion. Why? Why? Because of what Derek Chauvin did, even though what Derek Chauvin did had nothing to do with George Floyd's race, as far as we know. This is what's happening in our country. Hope you enjoyed that video. The full show is available to watch right now on Epoch TV. Just click the link in the description below to learn more, because we've got a country to save.